The radiation meter crackled with malevolent static as Dr. Sarah Chin adjusted its frequency, her gloved fingers working with practiced precision despite the bulky hazmat suit. 300 meters above her head, what remained a Chicago ride under a sky the color dried blood, while acid rain carved fresh scars into the skeletal remains of skyscrapers. Sector 7 shows elevated cesium levels, she reported into her comm unit, her voice muffled by the respirator. Recommend extending the quarantine zone another 50 meters. The response came through layers of interference. Copy, Dr. Chun. Return to Bunker Complex Alpha 7 immediately. Storm system approaching from the northwest. Sarah looked up through her visor at the churning crimson clouds. The storms had been getting worse since the third Cascade failure 18 months ago. First came the reactor meltdowns, not just Chernobyl or Fukushima this time, but dozens of facilities across 6 continents, their cooling systems overwhelmed by the solar flares that had preceded the real catastrophe. Then the asteroid Apophis, too, they called it, though the name seemed almost quaint now. The impact in the Atlantic had triggered tsunami waves that reached inland for hundreds of kilometers, while the atmospheric debris plunged the world into a nuclear winter that somehow coexisted with the greenhouse effect from burning cities and ruptured gas lines. But it was a biological warfare that had truly sealed humanity's fate. In the chaos following the impact, desperate nations had unleashed engineered plagues upon their enemies, not realizing that in a world where the jet streams had been fundamentally altered, biological warfare recognized no borders. The Red Death, as survivors called it, had swept across continents with the efficiency of a computer virus, leaving behind only scattered pockets of immune individuals huddled in underground sanctuaries. Sarah began her trek back to the bunker entrance, her boots crunching over glass that had been fused into strange crystalline formations by the heat of that first terrible week. Twisted metal sculptures that had once in automobiles dotted the landscape like abstract monuments to humanity's hubris. In the distance, she could make out the phosphorescent glow of one of the biohazard zones, where mutated organisms thrived in conditions that would kill any natural Earth life within minutes. The bunker entrance was camouflaged beneath what appeared to be rubble, but Sarah's trained eye picked out the subtle technological markers, the nearly invisible sensor array, the carefully positioned debris that would collapse inward rather than block the entrance if disturbed. She pressed her palm against a section of seemingly random concrete, and after a moment's scan, the hidden door slid aside with barely a whisper. The decontamination chamber beyond was a marvel of efficiency, bathing her in precisely calibrated bursts of radiation, chemical neutralizers, and finally a mist of broad-spectrum antibiotics. As the green light finally activated, allowing her passage into the bunker proper, Sarah reflected on the bitter irony that humanity had developed technology to protect itself from the very disasters it had created, but only enough to save a precious few. Bunker Complex Alpha 7 housed nearly 800 souls, scientists, engineers, doctors, teachers, and a carefully selected cross-section of genetic diversity that the biocomputers had determined would give humanity the best chance of long-term survival. The main corridor stretched ahead like the aorta of some vast mechanical heart, its walls lined with hydroponic gardens that provided both food and the psychological comfort of growing things. The air recycling systems hummed with quiet efficiency, scrubbing and purifying the atmosphere in an endless cycle that kept them alive for the past 3 years. Sarah made her way to the command center, where the colony's leadership maintained their constant vigil over the slowly dying world above. The main screen displayed a real-time composite image from satellites that somehow still functioned despite the electromagnetic storms that regularly swept the planet. Red zones marked areas where radiation exceeded lethal thresholds, while black regions indicated territories where biological contamination had reached concentrations that made them effectively uninhabitable for the next several centuries. Dr. Chen, thank you for the report, said Commander Williams, a gray-haired woman whose steady demeanor had held the community together through the worst of times. I'm afraid the readings from the other survey teams aren't any more encouraging. Dr. Petrov's team in what used to be Moscow reports similar contamination levels, and the Australian team. She paused, consulting her tablet. Well, the Australian team hasn't reported in for 72 hours. Sarah felt the familiar weight of despair settle over her shoulders like a lead blanket. They all knew what radio silence meant. Another bunker complex lost. Another few hundred human souls snuffed out by the unforgiving world that had once been their home. Each loss made their own survival seem more precious and more futile simultaneously. Commander called out Lieutenant Morrison from the communication station. "I'm getting something unusual on the Deep Space Monitoring Array. It's definitely artificial, but it's not matching any of our satellite signatures." Williams moved to Morrison's station, her expression shifting to professional alertness. "Show me." The auxiliary screen flickered to life, displaying a three-dimensional representation of near-Earth space. Among the slowly moving dots that represented dead satellites and space debris, three larger objects moved with obvious purpose and coordination. Their trajectory was bringing them directly toward Earth. "How long until intercept?" Williams asked. Morrison worked his calculations quickly. At their current velocity, approximately 18 hours until they reached low Earth orbit. Williams turned to Sarah. "Dr. Chun, I want you to coordinate with the other bunker complexes. If these are visitors, then we need to present a unified response. And God help us all if they're not friendly." 18 hours later, the inhabitants of Bunker Complex Alpha 7 crowd around every available screen as the three massive vessels descended through Earth's turbulent atmosphere. The ships defied easy description. Their surfaces seemed to flow like liquid metal, shifting between states of matter in ways that suggested technology far beyond human understanding. They were beautiful and terrible simultaneously, graceful as whales but vast as mountains. The lead vessel settled onto what had once been the plains of Kansas, its landing creating geometric patterns in the corrupted soil that were visible from orbit. The other two ships positioned themselves with mathematical precision over the Pacific Ocean and the Mediterranean Sea, their presence somehow calming the radioactive storms that had raged in those regions for months. "My God," whispered Dr. Yuki Tanaka, the bunker's lead physicist. "The energy readings are off the charts. Whatever's powering those ships could run our entire facility for 10,000 years. The global communication network, such as it remained, crackled with transmissions from the surviving bunker complexes. Humanity's remnants shared the same mixture of hope and terror as they watched their uninvited guests settle onto their dying world. Then the ships began to sing. It wasn't audible in any conventional sense, but every monitoring device that could detect electromagnetic radiation picked up the complex patterns streaming from the vessels. The signals were clearly artificial, clearly intelligent, and clearly directed at anyone who might be listening. Dr. Tanaka worked frantically to decode the transmissions, her fingers flying over a console as she applied every cryptographic technique in her considerable arsenal. "It's mathematical," she announced after an hour of intensive work. "They're transmitting in prime numbers, then progressing to more complex mathematical relationships. It's the same progression that we've been broadcasting into deep space for decades, a universal mathematical language." Commander Williams studied the decoded fragments. The initial mathematical greeting had given way to more complex concepts: stellar cartography, atomic structures, and what appeared to be genetic information. But it was a final section that made her blood run cold. "Those genetic sequences," she said slowly, "are those?" "Human DNA," Dr. Chin confirmed, having run the sequences through their biological databases. "But not quite. It's like looking at a blueprint for humanity, but one that includes elements we've never seen before. Dormant genetic sequences, potential evolutionary pathways that never activated. The implications hung in the air like a toxic cloud. If these visitors possessed detailed knowledge of human genetics, knowledge that surpassed humanity's own understanding of itself, then the relationship between species was far more complex than anyone had dared imagine. The answer came 6 hours later when a smaller craft detached from the lead vessel and approached the coordinates that the bunker complexes had transmitted. The landing ship was a marvel of engineering that somehow managed to look both organic and technological, as if it had been grown rather than built. As it settled onto the surface, a section of its hull became transparent, revealing the figures within. They were unmistakably humanoid but elongated and elegant in ways that suggested either careful breeding or technological augmentation. Their skin held a subtle luminescence that reminded the observers of deep-sea creatures, and their eyes were larger than human norms, adapted perhaps to lower light conditions. But it was their movements that truly marked them as alien. They flowed rather than walked, their gestures containing a mathematical precision that was beautiful and unsettling. The lead figure approached the bunker entrance and placed his hand against a hidden scanner, somehow knowing exactly where to touch. When the decontamination chamber activated, the being stood patiently in the center as the various treatments cycled through their protocols. When the inner door finally opened, Commander Williams and her senior staff waited in the main corridor, uncertain whether they were greeting saviors or executioners. The being spoke in perfect, unaccented English. "We are the keepers, and you are our children. We have come to take you home." The words echoed through the bunker's communication system, reaching every resident simultaneously. The keeper continued, its voice carrying harmonic overtones that seemed to resonate in the listener's bones. "Long ago, we seeded many worlds with the potential for intelligent life. Earth was one of our greatest successes, though we had not anticipated the self-destructive tendencies that emerged in your species. We have watched from afar as you built great civilizations and then tore them down, as you reached for stars and then poisoned your own world. The time has come to gather our scattered children and bring them to safety." Commander Williams found her voice, though it seemed small and fragile compared to the keeper's resonant tones. "You're saying that you created us?" "Not created, but guided. The genetic potential was always within your species, waiting for proper conditions to express itself. Your ancestors were promising primates, but they lacked the spark that would elevate them to true consciousness. We provided that spark, and then we waited to see what you would become." Dr. Chin stepped forward, her scientific curiosity overcoming her fear. "The dormant genetic sequences we detected in your transmissions, are those our original templates?" The keeper's expression, though alien, conveyed something that might have been approval. "Your species has retained more curiosity than we feared. Yes, those sequences represent your full potential. The activation of those genes would grant you extended lifespans, enhanced cognitive abilities, and resistance to the toxins that now poison your world. But such activation requires technologies that you have not yet developed." The implications were staggering. Not only were these beings offering rescue, but they were offering transformation, the chance to become something more than human, or perhaps to become what humans were always meant to be. "Our ships can carry approximately 50,000 individuals," the keeper continued. "We have identified the surviving population centers and calculated optimal selection parameters to ensure genetic diversity and cultural preservation. The journey to our world will take several years by your reckoning, but our ships are equipped to sustain your population indefinitely." Williams felt the weight of impossible responsibilities settle onto her shoulders. 50,000 people. Out of the billions who had once called Earth home, only 50,000 would survive to see the stars. The mathematics of survival had never seemed so brutal. "What about Earth?" asked Dr. Tanaka. "Is there no hope for our world?" The keeper turned his luminous gaze toward the physicist, and for a moment his composure seemed to waver. "Your world is dying, but death and rebirth are part of the cosmic cycle. In time, perhaps 1,000 of your years, perhaps 10,000, Earth will heal itself. The radiation will decay, the biological contaminants will break down, and life will begin again. But that new life will not include your species, as it currently exists." The finality of the statement hit the assembled humans like a physical blow. Earth would survive, but humanity would not. They would become refugees among the stars, dependent on the kindness of beings who claimed to be their creators, but who had watched them passively as their world burned. But as the keeper turned to leave, one voice spoke up from the back of the group, a voice that would change the course of both species' destinies. "Wait," said Comrade Louise. Louise Volkov had been 13 years old when the world ended, but the 3 years since had aged her far beyond her chronological years. She possessed the kind of sharp intelligence that emerges from necessity, honed by the constant requirement to think her way around problems that would have defeated adults twice her age. As the bunker's youngest permanent resident, she had been largely overlooked by the adults who made the important decisions, but her unofficial role as the community's problem solver had earned her a grudging respect. She was also the only person in the bunker who still believed that Earth could be saved. "I've been listening to your conversation," she said, stepping forward with the fearless confidence that comes with having nothing left to lose. And I think you're wrong about our world. The keeper turned to regard her with those large, luminescent eyes. If it was surprised to be challenged by a human child, it showed no sign. Explain your reasoning, young one. Louise activated her tablet, displaying a series of calculations and models that she had been working on for months. You're thinking about this problem like engineers, trying to fix a broken system by replacing it. But Earth isn't a machine. It's a living organism, and organisms have natural healing mechanisms. She gestured to the main screen, calling up real-time data from the surface monitoring stations. Look at the patterns. The radiation isn't dispersing randomly. It's following predictable decay curves. The biological contaminants aren't spreading indefinitely. They're being contained by natural barriers and environmental factors. And the climate disruption is already beginning to stabilize. Earth isn't just dying. It's adapting. Dr. Chen leaned forward, studying Louise's data with professional interest. The child has a point. Some of these trends are encouraging, but the timescales involved are measured in centuries, not decades, Louise finished. But what if we could accelerate the process? What if we could help Earth heal itself instead of abandoning it? The keeper's expression remained unreadable, but its posture suggested attention rather than dismissal. Continue. Louise took a deep breath, knowing that she was about to propose something that would sound like madness to everyone in the room. Your ships, they're not just transportation vessels. They're terraforming engines. I can see it in the energy signatures, in the way they're already affecting local weather patterns. You have the technology to repair damaged ecosystems on a planetary scale. That is correct, the keeper acknowledged. Our vessels carry atmospheric processors, genetic reconstruction matrices, and quantum-scale environmental manipulators. But the energy requirements to heal a world as damaged as Earth would be enormous, and the time involved would still span centuries. Not if we approach it systematically, Louise countered, her excitement growing as she saw that the alien was actually considering her proposal. We don't need to fix everything at once. We need to create a cascade of positive feedback loops that will amplify each other over time. She called up another set of models, these ones showing global weather patterns and ocean currents. Start with the atmospheric composition. Your ships could seed the upper atmosphere with engineered organisms designed to break down radioactive particles and toxic compounds. As the air clears, plant life will begin to recover, which will help stabilize the climate. Meanwhile, we focus on cleaning the oceans using similar bioengineered solutions. Dr. Petrov, who had been silent throughout the exchange, suddenly spoke up. The biofilms, he said, his voice filled with realization. The artificial organisms we detected in some of the less contaminated areas, they're not random mutations. They're already doing what you're describing. Louise nodded enthusiastically. Exactly. Earth is already trying to heal itself using the genetic material available. But with your technology, we could guide that process, accelerate it, and ensure that it proceeds in directions that will support human life. The keeper was quiet for several long moments, its alien features revealing nothing of its thoughts. When it finally spoke, its voice carried new harmonics that suggested consultation with others of its kind. Your proposal is intriguing, it said carefully, but you underestimate the complexity of planetary restoration. The energy requirements alone would demand resources that our fleet cannot spare, and the genetic engineering necessary to create self-sustaining bioremediation organisms would require samples of Earth's original ecosystem, samples that no longer exist. Louise smiled, the expression transforming her young face with sudden brilliance. But they do exist. Every bunker complex has genetic banks, seed vaults, tissue samples, complete genomic libraries of Earth's biodiversity. They're scattered across the globe, hidden and protected, but they're there. And as for the energy requirements, she paused, calling up one final display on her tablet. Your ships are powered by controlled fusion reactions, aren't they? The same process that powers our sun. Earth has vast oceans full of deuterium and tritium. Instead of taking 50,000 people to your world, what if you took 50,000 volunteers and turned them into the workforce needed to heal our world? The audacity of the proposal left the assembled humans speechless. Louise was suggesting that instead of fleeing Earth, humanity should become Earth's physicians, working with alien technology to perform surgery on a planetary scale. Commander Williams found her voice first. Louise, what you're proposing, it will be the most ambitious undertaking in human history. The risks are no greater than the risks of abandoning our world, Louise interrupted. And if we succeed, we wouldn't just be saving humanity. We'd be proving that intelligence can triumph over destruction, that consciousness can heal the wounds that consciousness inflicts. The Keeper turned to address the wider group. This proposal would require agreement, not just from your species, but from mine. The Council of Keepers has already authorized evacuation. To reverse that decision and embark upon planetary restoration would require significant persuasion. Louise stepped closer to the being, her young voice carrying a weight of conviction that seemed to resonate in the bunker's metal walls. Then let us persuade them. Give us the chance to show that humanity is worth more than preservation, that we're worth redemption. The Keeper regarded her for a long moment, and then did something that no human had ever seen an alien do. It smiled. Very well, young healer. We will present your proposal to the Council, but understand that you are asking for something unprecedented. The commitment of an entire starfaring civilization to the restoration of a single damaged world. The arguments you present must be compelling beyond mere hope. Louise nodded, her expression serious despite her evident excitement. I understand, and I promise you, the arguments will be strong enough to move worlds. As the Keeper departed, promising to return with the Council's response, the bunker residents found themselves facing a choice they had never imagined: the comfortable certainty of evacuation or the terrifying possibility of attempting to heal their dying world. The debate that followed would rage for hours, but Louise had already begun preparing her presentation to the Council of Keepers. She had 3 days to craft arguments that would convince an alien civilization to help humanity save Earth. She intended to make every word count. The Council of Keepers convened in what could only be described as a parliament of minds, a vast chamber within the lead vessel, where thoughts became visible as cascading patterns of light and sound. Louise stood at the center of this sensory symphony, her small human form dwarfed by the assembled representatives of a galactic civilization that had guided the development of consciousness across thousands of worlds. She was not alone. Commander Williams stood beside her, along with Dr. Chun, Dr. Tanaka, and representatives from every surviving bunker complex on Earth. The communication technology that made this gathering possible was beyond their understanding. Somehow, their words were being translated not just into alien languages, but into concepts that could be grasped by minds that had evolved under different stars. The lead Keeper, who had introduced itself as Hierarch Zephyros, gestured for silence. The light patterns in the chamber dimmed to a soft phosphorescence that reminded Louise of her childhood visits to aquariums back when such places had existed. Young humans, Zephyros began, its voice carrying harmonics that suggested vast age and experience. You have requested an unprecedented commitment from our civilization. The restoration of Earth would require the combined efforts of our entire fleet for the better part of a century. The energy expenditure would be enormous. The technological resources committed would be irreplaceable, and the opportunity cost would mean delaying our planned return to galactic core by several hundred of your years. Another Keeper, its form slightly more angular than Zephyros, stepped forward. I am Hierarch Axiom, and I speak for the efficiency protocols. Your species has already demonstrated a fundamental inability to maintain planetary stability. What assurance do we have that restored Earth would not simply be destroyed again by human carelessness or aggression? The challenge hung in the air like an accusation. Louise felt the weight of human history pressing down upon her. Every war, every act of environmental destruction, every short-sighted decision that had led to their current predicament. But she also felt something else, the stubborn hope that had kept her species alive through 3 years of hell. Hierarch Axiom, she began, her voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment. You're absolutely right to question our track record. Humanity has made terrible mistakes, and some of those mistakes brought our world to the edge of destruction. But that's exactly why we need to stay and fix it. She activated the holographic display that the Keepers had provided. showing a three-dimensional representation of Earth's current state alongside projections of its potential futures. Running away from our mistakes doesn't teach us anything. Taking 50,000 humans to your world might preserve our species, but it won't preserve the lessons we need to learn. Earth isn't just our home, it's our teacher. Dr. Chen stepped forward to support Louise's argument. In the 3 years since the Cascade failures began, we've learned more about environmental science, radiation cleanup, and biological restoration than we had in the previous century. Necessity has been our greatest teacher. Our survival protocols, our bioremediation techniques, our closed-loop ecological systems, all of these advances came from being forced to solve problems that we had created. A third keeper, whose form seemed to shimmer between states of matter, spoke with a voice like wind chimes. I am hierarch synthesis. The child's argument has merit, but it is based on the assumption that your species is capable of fundamental change. Our observations suggest that conscious beings tend to repeat their mistakes regardless of consequences. Louise had been prepared for this challenge. She called up another set of data, behavioral analyses from the bunker complexes, resource allocation patterns, and decision-making structures that had evolved during the crisis period. Hierarch synthesis. You're looking at us from the perspective of our past, but we're not the same species that destroyed our world. The humans in these bunkers have already changed. We've learned to think in terms of generations rather than quarters, to consider environmental impact in every decision, to treat resources as precious rather than expendable. She gestured to the assembled representatives. Commander Williams has kept 800 people alive for 3 years using resources that were designed to last 1 year. Dr. Petrov's team in Moscow has developed biological filters that can clean contaminated water using nothing but engineered algae and solar power. Dr. Martinez in South America has created vertical farming systems that produce more food per square meter than anything we had before the crisis. The patterns of light in the chamber shifted, suggesting discussion among the keepers at levels beyond human perception. Finally, a fourth keeper spoke, this one younger seeming than the others, its form more fluid and expressive. I am Hierarch Genesis, and I speak for the New World Initiative. The young human's passion is admirable, but passion alone cannot overcome physical limitations. Even with our technology, the restoration of Earth would require centuries. Your human lifespans are too brief to see the project through to completion. How do you propose to maintain continuity of purpose across multiple generations? This was a question that Louise had been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. It cut to the heart of humanity's greatest weakness, their tendency to lose sight of long-term goals in the face of immediate pressures. But it was also the question that had led her to her most audacious proposal. Hierarch Genesis, she said, you mentioned earlier that our species carries dormant genetic sequences, potential evolutionary pathways that never activated. What if they could be activated? What if the humans who undertook Earth's restoration could be transformed into something capable of thinking and planning on geological timescales? The silence that followed was absolute. Even the light patterns in the chamber seemed to pause, as if the very concept required processing time beyond normal parameters. Zephyros was the first to respond, its voice carrying new harmonics of surprise and consideration. You are proposing that we transform your species into something approaching our own longevity and cognitive capacity. This is unprecedented. The genetic modifications required would be irreversible. Those who underwent the process would no longer be entirely human, but they would still be human in the ways that matter, Louise countered. They would retain human creativity, human adaptability, human stubbornness. They would just gain the time and perspective necessary to heal our world properly. Dr. Tanaka stepped forward, her scientific training evident in her careful analysis of the proposal. The psychological implications would be enormous. Extended lifespans would fundamentally alter human culture, human relationships, human concepts of meaning and purpose. We would be creating a new species. We would be becoming the species we were meant to be, Louise corrected gently. The species you designed us to become before we took a wrong turn somewhere along the evolutionary path. The keepers conferred again, their light patterns creating a visual symphony of debate and consideration. When they finally returned their attention to humans, It was Hierarch Synthesis who spoke. Your proposal is remarkable in its scope and ambition, but it raises fundamental questions about consent and identity. Who would choose to undergo such transformation? And what are those who chose to remain unmodified? Louise had given considerable thought to this question during her preparation. The transformation would be entirely voluntary. Some humans would choose to become Earth's guardians, accepting extended lifespans and enhanced capabilities in exchange for dedicating their lives to planetary restoration. Others would choose to remain unmodified, either staying on Earth as it heals or accepting your original offer of evacuation to your world. She paused, looking around at the assembled representatives. But I think you'll find that more humans than you expect will choose to stay and fight for their world. We're a stubborn species, and this is our home. Given the choice between fleeing and fighting, many of us will choose to fight. Commander Williams nodded slowly. Louise is right. I've seen how people respond when their backs are against the wall. The survivors in these bunkers didn't make it through the last 3 years by giving up. They made it through by adapting, by innovating, by refusing to accept defeat. Given the tools and the time, they'll find a way to heal Earth. The patterns of light in the chamber reached a crescendo of activity, and then suddenly stilled. Zephyros stepped forward, its alien features arranged in an expression that might have been approval. Young healer, it said, addressing Louise directly, you have presented arguments that the Council cannot easily dismiss. Your proposal would represent the largest terraforming project in our civilization's history, but it would also represent something unprecedented. The voluntary evolution of an entire species in service of planetary restoration. The hierarch paused, consulting displays that were visible only to keep her eyes. We will require time to consider the full implications of your proposal. The genetic modifications alone would require extensive research and testing. The technological integration would demand innovations even beyond our current capabilities. And the philosophical questions raised by voluntary speciation have no precedent in our records. Louise felt her heart racing, but forced herself to remain calm. How much time? 1 full rotation of your planet, Zephyros replied. 24 of your hours. We will use that time to consult with our genetic engineers, our terraforming specialists, and our ethicists. If we agree to proceed, the commitment will be total. Our entire civilization will be involved in this project for at least one of your centuries. As the council dissolved into individual conversations and the light patterns dimmed to allow the humans to depart, Louise found herself face-to-face with Hierarch Genesis, the youngest of the Keepers. You carry within you the spark that we hoped to ignite when we first guided your species toward consciousness, it said, its voice carrying undertones of something that might have been pride. Regardless of the Council's decision, you have already proven that humanity possesses a potential we saw in your ancestors. Louise bowed slightly, a gesture that seemed appropriate despite the lack of human precedent for addressing galactic hierarchs. Thank you, Hierarch Genesis. But potential is just a beginning. Tomorrow, we'll find out if we have the courage to make it real. As the humans returned to their bunker, Louise spent a long night preparing for the most important day in human history, the day when her species would choose between the safety of the stars and the terrible, wonderful responsibility of healing their world. She fell asleep clutching calculations for atmospheric processors and genetic modification protocols, her dreams filled with visions of Earth reborn. Dawn came reluctantly to the poisoned world, the sun struggling through atmospheric layers thick with radiation and ash. But for the first time in 3 years, the sunrise brought something other than despair to the surviving remnants of humanity. Today would bring the Keeper's decision, and with it, the possibility of hope. Louise had barely slept, spending the night reviewing and refining her calculations until her tablet's battery died and her eyes burned with fatigue. But her mind remained sharp, focused on the incredible possibility that humanity might actually have a chance to save their world. The bunker's main assembly area had been converted into a communication center, with screens displaying real-time feeds from the surviving bunker complexes around the globe. Moscow's Bunker Complex Beta 3 showed Dr. Petrov and his team clustered around their monitors. The Australian survivors, who had re-established contact just hours before the Keeper's arrival, transmitted from their deep underground facility in what had once been Perth. Even the tiny outpost in Antarctica, with its population of 37, had managed to establish a link. In total, perhaps 10,000 human beings waited to learn their fate. Commander Williams stood before the main screen, her expression carefully neutral despite the tension that radiated from every person in the room. "Citizens of Earth," she began, her voice carrying to every corner of human civilization simultaneously. "Today we learn whether our species has a future among the stars or on our home world. Whatever the Keepers decide, remember that we are survivors. We have endured the worst catastrophe in human history, and we are still here. We are still fighting. We are still hoping." The screens flickered as the Keeper vessels began transmitting their response. Hierarch Zephyros appeared on every display simultaneously, its luminous features arranged in an expression that was impossible to read. "Humans of Earth," it began. "The Council of Keepers has spent your night cycle in unprecedented deliberation. The proposal brought before us by your young representative challenges not only our standard protocols, but our fundamental understanding of species development and planetary stewardship." Louise felt her heart hammering against her ribs, but forced herself to remain still. Everything depended on the next few minutes. "Your request for technological assistance in planetary restoration is within our capabilities," Zephyros continued. "Your proposal for voluntary genetic modification to enable long-term thinking is theoretically feasible. But the combination of these elements would create something that has never been attempted in our civilization's history: the conscious evolution of an entire species for the purpose of healing their world." The hierarch paused, consulting data streams that flickered across displays only the Keepers could see. "After extensive analysis and debate, the Council has reached a decision. We will approve your proposal with conditions." The cheer that erupted from bunkers around the globe was audible even through the communication lag. Louise felt tears streaming down her face as she realized that her impossible dream was about to become reality. But Zephyros raised a hand for silence, indicating that the announcement was not complete. "The conditions are as follows," the hierarch continued. "First, participation in the genetic modification program must be entirely voluntary, with full informed consent from each individual. No human will be coerced or pressured to undergo transformation." Louise nodded, having expected this requirement. The Keeper's ethical standards were far too advanced to permit anything resembling forced evolution. "Second, the restoration project will be conducted in phases, with clear benchmarks for success. If at any point the project appears to be failing, or if the transformed humans prove incapable of maintaining their commitment across generations, we will implement evacuation protocols for the remaining population." This condition was more concerning, but Louise recognized its necessity. The Keepers were taking an enormous risk, and they needed safeguards to protect their investment of time and resources. "Third, a controlled population of unmodified humans will be maintained both on Earth and on our homeworld. This will ensure species continuity regardless of the project's outcome, and will provide a genetic baseline for future reference." Dr. Chen leaned over to whisper in Louise's ear. "They're thinking like scientists. They want to maintain experimental controls while testing their hypothesis about human potential." "Fourth and finally," Zephyros continued, "the Council requires a demonstration of your species' commitment to this project. We need evidence that humans will actually volunteer for genetic modification in significant numbers, and that they understand the magnitude of the undertaking they are proposing." Louise stepped forward, her young voice carrying across the global communication network. "Hierarch Zephyros, how many volunteers will be required for this demonstration?" 100 individuals from each surviving population center, minimum. They must represent diverse genetic backgrounds, skill sets, and age ranges. And they must pass both psychological evaluations and genetic compatibility tests before modification can begin. The number sent a ripple of nervous energy through the assembled humans. 2,000 volunteers from a total surviving population of perhaps 10,000 meant that 1 in 5 humans would need commit to permanent transformation based on nothing more than hope and theoretical projections. Commander Williams was the first to respond. "Hierarch Zephyros, what timeline are we looking at for this demonstration?" 1 full lunar cycle, approximately 30 of your days. During this period, our genetic engineers will prepare the modification protocols while your volunteers undergo evaluation and preparation. If the demonstration succeeds, full-scale restoration will begin immediately. Louise looked around the bunker at her fellow survivors. These were people who had already sacrificed everything for survival, who had adapted to unimaginable hardships, and still found the strength to hope for something better. If anyone could make this impossible project succeed, it was them. "I volunteer," she said simply. The words echoed through the communication network as similar declarations began emerging from bunkers around the globe. Dr. Petrov's voice carried clearly from Moscow. "My entire research team volunteers. From Australia, we have 43 people ready to commit. From Antarctica, all 37 of us are in." Within an hour, the demonstration quota had been exceeded by a factor 3. Nearly 6,000 humans had volunteered to undergo permanent genetic modification for the chance to heal their world. The psychological profiles that the keepers had insisted upon would ultimately select the final 2,000, but the sheer scale of the response spoke to something fundamental about human nature that even the advanced aliens found surprising. Hierarch Genesis, the youngest of the keepers, addressed the volunteers directly. "Humans who have chosen transformation, understand that you will be pioneers of a new form of consciousness. Your lifespans will be measured in millennia rather than decades. Your cognitive abilities will be enhanced beyond current human norms. Your sensory perception will be expanded to include electromagnetic spectra that your current biology cannot detect. You will become something more than human, but in service of something essentially human, the healing of your home world." Louise felt a shiver of anticipation mixed with terror. To live for thousands of years, to think thoughts that no human had ever thought, to see their world slowly transform from a poisoned wasteland into a garden. It was beyond imagination, but it was also beyond fear. "When do we begin?" she asked. Zephyros consulted its displays one final time. "Genetic modification begins in 7 of your days. The first volunteers will be brought aboard our vessels for transformation. The restoration project will commence simultaneously, with atmospheric processors beginning the long work of cleaning your sky." As the transmission ended, and the screens returned to their normal displays, Louise found herself surrounded by the other volunteers from Bunker Complex Alpha 7. Their faces showed the same mixture of excitement and terror that she felt. The knowledge that they were about to embark on the most ambitious undertaking in human history. Dr. Chen placed a hand on Louise's shoulder. "Are you sure about this, Louise? Once the genetic modifications begin, there's no going back. You won't age the way the rest of us do. You'll watch generations of unmodified humans live and die while you continue working on the restoration project." Louise nodded slowly, considering the full implications of her choice. "Dr. Chun, 3 days ago I thought I was going to watch the last human beings die in underground bunkers while our world slowly poisoned itself to death. Now I have the chance to spend the next 1,000 years bringing Earth back to life. Even if it's hard, even if it's lonely sometimes, it's still the most incredible opportunity anyone has ever been offered." She looked around at her fellow volunteers, seeing her own determination reflected in their faces. "Besides," she added with a smile that transformed her serious young features, "I won't be alone. We'll all be in this together, and we'll all be working toward the same goal. If that's not enough to sustain hope across the centuries, then I don't know what is." As the bunker returned to its normal routines, modified now by the incredible knowledge that salvation was actually possible, Louise began preparing for the transformation that would change her from a human child into something unprecedented. A guardian of worlds, a healer of planets, a bridge between what humanity had been and what it might become. The restoration of Earth was about to begin, and she would be there to see it through from beginning to end.